you are watching the, yes, the best John Doe guide. 19 people asked for this, but this is gonna be the best John Doe guide. I've been maining John Doe since ever since I started playing this game. I mean, I started playing Noli, but then I went to John Doe because I've just always found trapper killers to be the most versatile and just have the highest skill ceiling and have the most potential when you master them. I main Artful and Die of Death, but I'm level 292 on John Doe, so obviously I know what I'm talking about. I'm just gonna show literally the best way to go about every situation, the best way to use every ability, what you shouldn't do, what you should do in situations, stuff like that, obviously. Skill ceiling wise and how hard killers are to play, John Doe is definitely the hardest killer to play out of all 7, since spikes are some of the most versatile and there's so many different ways you could spike and just really hard to use if you don't, like, you know how to play John Doe. But I might put in some clips from my other John Doe videos I've done. I have a lot of John Doe videos, and I might use some moments in those videos as examples of what I did and what you should be doing as John Doe and how to literally master this killer. I wouldn't say I mastered this killer, like, in my opinion, but I still definitely say I'm good on John Doe. But enough yapping. Digital footprint. So, digital footprint, honestly, the most textbook and just very easy ability to use, but obviously there's still a lot of explaining to do. Digital footprint, very simple. It's literally just used to block off the most used and strongest loop spots on every map. Digital footprints can also be used to have very good synergy with your spikes in certain boxing spots on maps. You put footprints on your left foot, so when you're placing a footprint, there's a lot of spots in the game where you can definitely place it wrong if you're not paying attention, or you just mindlessly just press E and walk over to a spot. So you line yourself up, press E, you just line yourself up with the left foot and it'll be right in the middle, and this is really important for a lot of spots because had I just press E like right here or over here, this would not be centered and it can literally just slip by the footprint. And one thing with John Doe, you can play John Doe if you want as your very first killer if you want. If you're literally new to the game though, I probably wouldn't recommend it. You can if you want, if you're fine with losing a lot, but if you do not have any map knowledge, you are going to lose a lot of games, and that is the most important thing with John Doe. Really, technically every killer, but John Doe is obviously a map-dependent killer, and you need to know all the intricacies with where you can spike, like where you can perfectly spike, even if you can't see it. Map knowledge is absolutely crucial, and just knowing the points where survivors want to path in, like these strongest loop spots, is very important, because even if it's not necessarily a loop spot, you're gonna want to know how to zone the survivor and make the survivor deviate from any sort of loop spot as much as possible. This right here is literally one of the strongest loop spots in the game. Honestly, probably the most strongest loop spot. Has really long check spots. It's really easy to get a really good chase starter, and putting a footprint here just stops this entire loop spot. One thing you definitely shouldn't do with footprint is putting footprints on like elevation spots. Like, it's not the most useless, it's not like it does absolutely nothing, but it's better to put a footprint over at a loop spot than it is to put it over at like an elevation spot you completely block them off from going to, because sure, this whole place is like blocked off by a footprint and they can't go up here, but it's very dissectable. Even that I'll show later, but you could just kind of spike it off when you have a footprint here at least, and it's very easy to dissect like some spots like this in the game with footprint and spikes without having to have the footprint here already, and you just get so much more value out of putting a footprint over on very strong loop spots rather than just completely blocking off an area that most good players won't even go to anyway. This also, for example, is a really strong loop spot. It's not like the strongest one on this map, but it's still definitely really good for survivors to run around. Every footprint on every map should be on the strongest loop spots possible. Like on glass houses, like these are some really strong chain loop spots. Like usually the survivor will run around this, and if they feel like breaking the loop, they'll go over to this rock over here, or maybe they'll go over around this if they path correctly, and then you have to run all the way around. So usually you want to footprint stuff like this right in the middle where your left foot is. I did it wrong like a chud, but you would footprint this off, you know, the correct way, and not make it where they can just go like this. And like I said, one thing you don't want to do is basically just using footprints to completely block off areas that have like 2 entrances or just like one part of the map, and using more than one footprint to just block off an area. There's no point of doing that. Like, one footprint is already does so much for this little loop right here, and putting 2 here, like, sure, you block off this entire cave loop, which is the strongest part on this map, but like if you use 2 footprints to block off that, now you only have 1 footprint to block off this area, and you do block off some really good loops, but you still leave 1 really good loop over here and potentially a loop right here, because an alternative footprint spot instead of there would be right here. That way you block off this little loop, and you can block off this little thing. The time where you put a footprint in between each match is literally just downtime. At the start of every match, obviously you place footprints. The only time you don't place footprints, like right when the match starts, if like, let's say you run out of killer spawn and you go over to this, and somebody immediately puts themselves in like a cooked spot right here, and then you kind of just, you know, I'll get to it later, but you can kind of just start zoning immediately, because you shouldn't be footprinting here and wasting the opportunity to just, you know, literally abuse someone who puts himself in a terrible position. And then maybe if you get like stunned and you lose a chase, or like maybe you get a kill over here, like I kill somebody right here and like everyone else is extremely at a distance, then you kind of just use that downtime and the time on the clock to put down your footprints. You actually don't always have to do that. You can also just place footprints if you have like no like map control at the moment. Like let's say like you've killed like 3 out of the 6 people in the lobby and you still have 2 minutes on the clock and you need to go place down all your footprints because you have no true map control. I will get to it in a bit, but putting footprints down too also just enhance your spikes just that much more. These loops right here are so 50-50 for your spikes that not having a footprint here is literally detrimental and makes it so 50-50. So if anyone decides to run over here, it's basically just very textbook to do spikes like this and just kind of go all the way out like this, and they have nowhere to go. But before I move on to abilities like, you know, corrupt energy and basically the most versatile ability in the game, I can show some examples of footprint spots and how like the best way you can use your footprints. So Horror Hotel, maps like Horror Hotel, honestly one of the best John Doe maps. But if John Doe has absolutely no idea what they're doing, you're gonna get cooked on this map, because even though this map is still really good for John Doe, maybe like around top 5-ish, there's still a lot of loopholes, and if you don't cover the best things possible, then you're gonna get absolutely destroyed. This map is huge, and there is a lot of loop spots. Like this loop spot right here, this L shape, huge check spot, just get an absolutely godly chase start. That's why Slasher is just one of the is just the worst killer on this map. You get absolute godly chase starts on loops like this, and literally like top 3 loops in the game. This right here, literally this loop just never ends, and if you do not footprint this, you're just kind of cooked. But loops like this, honestly, spikes cannot really do anything because they'll just outrun you and you just get destroyed. So you literally just simply put down footprints and stuff like this, and they cannot loop this. They're forced to go somewhere else, and if someone steps on it, they get slowness too, they get cooked. Maybe even if an 07 like clears it or something, like they'll just get speed for your chase, but it really depends. But on maps like this, like I won't show this for every single map, but I always show like the footprints that are really good and just like the footprints that most people probably don't do. There's a lot of different footprints you can do on this one, but I do this footprint because it blocks off this god loop, and it also makes this unloopable right here because this is also a pretty good loop. This footprint here is also pretty crucial. Also keep in mind, most of these are mostly meat kill footprints, but like they're like pretty much the only right footprints, so they're gonna be like that. Obviously, you could always experiment and just do with what footprints you feel like are effing people over, which is perfectly fine, but there is a general, like, what is literally the strongest footprints on every map. That footprint is to block off this broken-ass loop, and even the classic meat kill spike setup is to just go at this door handle and just go all the way like that. And now all of this is just absolutely cooked. You can't even loop this. You're just absolutely fried here. Your best bet is this, and this is a terrible loop. So, and your last footprint, you can also just kind of freeball. Most people put it right here, which is absolutely fine because this little loop right here has a huge check spot, but I usually put a footprint right here. Especially with noobs on this map, this entire hallway is impossible for some guy to just sit somewhere in fucking Ghost Burger or just sit on the side of the map in Ghost Burger and play this check spot. And then Chud, but seems like insane. I'm not changing my footprints because these footprints over here. That is all I got for digital footprint. Honestly, textbook ability, but still a lot of wrong ways to use it. Now we get into what is the hardest ability to use, but also the most versatile in the entire game from all the killer abilities, in my opinion, corrupt energy. Spikes is so hard to use for so many John Doe players is because you're simply just using it in the wrong spot. The very last thing you should be doing when you are chasing a survivor, let's say, obviously killer spawn is over here. Let's say you catch a survivor out over here, and they're kind of just running along this, and they're just running straight, and they're just, you're just chasing them. The last thing you want to do is to just randomly pop spikes and just fucking do whatever you're gonna do and just send spikes. You're not trapping anything doing it like this. The most times you're gonna be able to trap someone is obviously on like the outskirts, like if somebody's positioned over here, or maybe somebody's like way over here. Sadly, the work at a pizza place, I'm only on this map because this is a really good example of bad spikes and what you could do with other good spikes. This is one of the worst maps in the game, honestly, like probably like top 3 worst John Doe maps. The footprints aren't terrible. Like you footprint here, right in the middle right here. This Jenny's here, so just extra points, but you footprint right here to block off all these loops. This being one of the strongest loops right here in the game. You footprint this right here to block up all this. It's basically this entire quadrant of the map because they cannot run around this truck. This truck is really strong, and there's so many chain loops that you would just go from that truck, run around this, and then go back to the loops over here. But though the footprints are good, it's not enough. I mean, John Doe should never get more footprints, but there's just so much open space, there's so many little loops that your spikes in like the middle parts right here will not do anything. You're gonna have to hit them with your spikes, which I'll get to later on the right times to do that. But basically on maps like this, you usually actually want to use your footprints to get them out of the middle and out of the parts where you can't zone, and to force them on the outskirts on the map. A good footprint would be right here, so that way you can block up this loop and this whole loop right here, or you can put your footprint right here to block up this little loop and this loop. But basically, when you're spiking, you always want to consider where is the most favorable spot for them to pre-run. An example would be if I'm standing right here as a survivor and you're standing back here, where would be the best spot for me to run while you're in that position? Would the best spot for me to run over here, or would it be the best for me to run that way? Ideally, it would be this way. You shouldn't be spiking right there anyway, but ideally the survivor is going to want to run this way because you basically cannot spike trap this, at least from that position. And every single time you're zoning and you're trapping with spikes, you need to make sure your spikes are going through the things that the survivors can loop every single time, because let's say somebody is standing like right here. This loop is actually pretty decent. Let's say someone is standing on the other side right here. The survivor wants to start a chase right here, or they're just here after mid-chase. Spiking like this does not do anything. You force them to not go to the left over here or like to your right, sure, but this loop is still possible. You did not block off this loop. They can still run around this. They did not take any punishment whatsoever. You just wasted your ability, and now you're on 20 seconds cooldown and you cannot do anything. Every time you spike, it is absolutely crucial to spike through the things that the survivors can play and loop on, because zoning is absolutely OP in this game. Getting really strong chase starts with 110 stamina right next to the survivor basically results in their death or taking a shit ton of damage. Another example would be, even though this is a dead zone, these tables in a bad situation is not the worst to loop. These are pretty decent loops to just run around. So in this situation, if someone's around this, a good spike would be to go into shift lock. You always shift lock when you spike, and you curve and you block off the tables, and that goes for basically every single loop you try to block off. They cannot loop this, they cannot loop this, they cannot play these tables. They're absolutely cooked if they decide to stay over here on this side. And make sure you always shift lock. That's very textbook, but I feel like some John Does don't know that. You always shift lock, because if you don't, then your spikes just kind of go straight like that. And once again, just a lot of map knowledge. It's just, John Doe is very map dependent. You can still do all right on even some of his bad maps, but if you want to know, the best time to spike is honestly if you're in chase and they don't really dead zone themselves well enough to like where spiking or doing something like this would be the best, and you don't really feel like you have the time to spike. Basically, if you're in mid chase, let's say both of you hit like 10 stamina, or you both hit 1 stamina, you're just doing little sprint bursts and walk bursts. That is the absolute best time to spike if you are in a very isolated area, and just the best time to spike because they do not have the stamina to run out of your spikes. You guys both hit 1 stamina right here, and you simply just kind of go like this, then they have absolutely nowhere to go because, well, they had no stamina. And every time you zone, literally every time you zone and you trap someone in between spikes like this and they have nowhere to go, do not go from 110 stamina and absolutely just sprint at them and start M1ing. Even if you get the hit, you're actually down stamina, which is obviously the last thing you want to be in a chase. But you run up, you regain your stamina all the way to 110, and you start the chase as close as you can, literally in their face. You start the chase as close as you can possible, and you get an M1. And every time when somebody is zoned and you M1 them, run back immediately. It doesn't matter if like they try to juke you and like run around and run this way. Do not try to track them and try to get even more M1s and be greedy. Literally run back immediately, because as a survivor, when you're in a terrible position, the best thing to do, and really the only thing to do, is to take hit speed boost. And that's when you get hit by an M1, obviously, and you abuse like the speed, like speed 4 for a second and run out, because that's how you get out of bad situations. Get an M1, hit an M1, run back immediately, and you can honestly probably track them, and if your track is good enough, get even another M1 and win the chase. And do not be in a chase. You basically just start the chase and just send your spikes straight in the middle of the open. You make just an entire god loop and you just get absolutely destroyed, because they already have distance on you from the end lag and the animation of your spikes. And if you just send spikes, they can just go like this and you just get absolutely destroyed. Every time you spike, you want it to connect to something that they cannot run around or like possibly deviate somewhere else to escape. Now, obviously, John Doe is a trapper killer. You always, 90% of the time, or like, I don't know, 70, 80% of the time, you want to be trapping, because, you know, that's how John Doe plays. But there is some situations, like I said, this is one of the worst maps in the game, and there's other horrible maps in the game like Planet Voss, Beach House Paradise, Cool Kid Carnival. They're just absolutely shit for John Doe, and there's legit like 3 trap spots. This map being one of them, for example. There's only technically like 4 trap spots. You have this area, that area that they shouldn't be going to anyway, so I'm not going to count it. It is a trap spot, but this is a trap spot, and over here that I already showed is a trap spot. But the thing is, like I said, this is a horrible map, and you do not have to go on the outskirts against John Doe. You can just play the little loops, just stamina manage, and you're Gucci. And as a John Doe, the only way, sadly, to go against that is by sniping. Sniping is obviously where you just try to hit the survivor with your spikes. Even though Sniper Doe is not the most consistent, it's still definitely not a bad thing to do. Like, Sniper Doe is extremely inconsistent because of the fact that if they just have a well-timed dodge, like, they'll just not get hit, and you just wasted an ability, and you lost distance, so you completely lose your chase. But the damage itself for the spike is not consistent either, because it depends on the direction you're spiking from and the way they're running, which obviously you cannot guarantee the way they're running unless you do a good zone. But basically, when you snipe, do not send your spikes straight forward and try to hit their spikes, because if you hit your spike like at the end, like right here, let's say your spike hits, it does not matter because you made a god loop. They get hit over here, you're back there, so what? You got your speed 1, but they can just run around your spikes, go like this, and you get absolutely shit on. What you're supposed to do is when you spike, stay at a shift lock. If you're, I don't know if you're on controller or PC, but my cursor is open. Stay at a shift lock, let your spikes go a little bit, and flick, and then probably flick away again, so that way the spikes don't keep going even after they hit. It takes time to get used to when the spike will hit and when to start flicking, but it is the way to snipe and the most consistent way to do it, because if you send it straight and just send straight spikes, you're just gonna get looped on your own spikes that you made, and you just lose your chase. Cola. The times to snipe is also when, if you're in a chase and let's say the chase kind of stops right here and you're at a little sprint burst and there's basically nowhere to trap. If you're in a spot where they're not even going to an area where they can be sniped, or not sniped, where they can't be trapped or they cannot be zoned, then that's where you press Q, go like this, and just flick. And also curving your spikes is just going to come with time. It's definitely not hard to do, but there is some people that struggle to curve their spikes correctly, because it's very possible to flick your spike too fast, and what happens is when you spike and flick too fast and go like this, you just leave gaps in your spikes, and now they just run out and you lose your chase. For 4 error, there's really not much to explain. It's just the overall map scan. It's just all about when to use it is really the only high skill thing about it. Bloodfell is actually a pretty good example where, let's say a survivor runs through over here, and not a lot of people go back here, especially against John Doe, because you shouldn't, but let's say they run through here and they run through all the way back. You would be back here, and this is where you would press R. Obviously, I can't really show because, you know, there ain't no players here, but you would press R, and that's a good time to get info and just send your spikes and just do a little zone, whatever you're gonna do, depends where the survivor is, but big back, big back, big back. Oh, and also your trail. I actually completely forgot to cover the trail because the trail's pretty textbook. You don't really use it on purpose to get kills, but do use your trail sometimes. Your M1 does 28 damage, and your trail can actually do like about 5, maybe even a little more damage to someone who's like 30 HP or like 35 HP, and you can actually use your trail to get the 1M1 you need to finish the kill. And it's really good chip damage to chip them down to 1M1, because you don't want to hit them with 2 M1s, because obviously M1 hit speed boost, then they'll be out of chase, and they have to have one more M1 if the stamina is that even between you and the survivor. But my face cam storage is almost fucked, so that's honestly, it was the end anyway, but that's all I'm gonna do for this guide. Hopefully this helped. John Doe, always been my favorite character. The very thing that you do have to just accept is just that you're not always gonna get the best map RNG, and you're gonna get fucked over, because obviously if you can't trap, you kind of just lose, because playing Sniper Doe, It's not the worst, but it's not consistent. It's not good because the damage is very inconsistent. It ranges from 12 to 46. It depends where the survivor is running and the way your spikes are already going. Almost level 300, John Doe. Almost there. But hopefully this helped once again. I'm not the best player in the world, but I do have a giant gauge on John and what to do in most situations. But that is my John Doe guide and the best John Doe guide. But anyway, I'll catch y'all in the next video. Peace.